Hello there, and good morning, Marina.
Good morning, Judy. How are you today?
Well, thank you. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
So while we are waiting for everybody to join up to this fabulous sustainability, what I might do is pour our own tea.
I love that.
Now, what we have today, Marina, is a leaf. I like to do local, generally, South Australian, but I was a bit behind the ball this time, so I've got something from up the top of Western Australia in the Dampier Peninsula. It is now I might butcher these names, so I couldn't find out how to pronounce them. So if anyone knows how to say these names, just jump on in. So it's the Nunyal people in the Dampier region, and this is a junglean tea leaf, which is apparently very restorative and also relaxing. So don't get too relaxed.
We'll need to be awake for this, but it does smell really nice.
And this fabulous Billy,
Lovely.
previously boiled, one I prepared earlier. I might just move that. Very rude of me to pour my own first.
I hope you all have your teas and coffees ready for our sustainability this morning as well.
And once again, I've forgotten the sieve to strain it, so you'll just have to use your tea.
You hear some crunching sounds. Well, welcome everyone to the first sustainability session of 2023. So my name is Marina, and I'm co-hosting with Shirley.
Yep, and yes, so I'm Kiralee, and we're both volunteers for the Adelaide Sustainable Building Network. But before we kick off, we would of course like to start with an acknowledgement of country. Marina, would you like to look at that?
Yes. So we'd like to acknowledge that our event today is held on Pandan, the traditional land of the people, and acknowledge that the traditional custodians of the various lands which we might be working from today, considering it's an online event. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to land and country, and that deep understanding of place that's integral to everything that we do.
Cheers to that. Now, we have today Gavin, who is the head of Better Cities and Regions at HIP Hype. Now, Gavin, welcome. Gavin Ashley, and if you would like to take it away, and you can perhaps introduce better than I can what you and your team have been up to.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and very happy to be here to talk to you all about some work that we've been initiating over the last few years with a number of partners that have contributed to the Green Factor tool. And I guess this session was born out of the recent exhibition of a critical amendment in the City of Melbourne, which proposes to use the tool, which I'm going to present to you, as the basis for a policy lever to greatly improve green infrastructure on buildings within the city. So thank you very much for the acknowledgement of country that's already done. We think it's a really good segue to what we're talking about today in terms of restoring some balance to the natural environment through developing cities differently. Just a little bit about our business before we get underway. So we're actually a business that is three businesses together. So we're a residential developer focusing on medium-rise residential development. Highly sustainable, design-led, and very strong feedback loops to our sustainability consulting practice, where I lead one of the team. So the sustainability practice includes my team, which is focuses on better cities and regions. We do sustainable precincts, we do policy and frameworks, where this particular project fits in. And we also do climate strategy for local government. Better Buildings focuses, as it says on the box, on ESD advisory services at the buildings level, and our business area works with organisations primarily in the built environment space on organisational strategy. That's our studio. I'm not in there today because the internet's playing up, and I didn't want you to lose me all, but. Yeah, we're the major tenant in that space, but there's also landscape architects and architects, etc., in there, which we collaborate on projects with. But to the focus of today's discussion. This idea to develop a green factor tool was led by the City of Melbourne under their Greening Our City Action Plan to look at sustainability targets that could be delivered through the planning scheme. And the green factor tool that I'm presenting on today was basically came out as an effective mechanism to deliver those policy objectives. So it dates back to sort of 2017 when I guess the spark of the idea came about, and there are international green factor tools, but the one that we developed for the City of Melbourne is the only one that we're still aware of that has got a web interface, and it uses a particular methodology around the value of ecosystem services. The City of Melbourne have been, I think it's safe to say, pushing pretty hard with state gov over a couple of years now to get this amendment on the table in a formal way. It proposes to replace a policy that already exists in Melbourne, which covers energy and water and waste, and really extend that to including a number of additional areas that contribute to a sustainable built form outcome. One of those is green infrastructure. Another one, for example, is embodied carbon. And this amendment, if approved in its current form, will be a significant increase on the targets that already exist in that planning policy and the introduction of those other sustainability categories and targets such as green infrastructure. So the idea is when you comply with the policy objectives of that policy, you do so using the green factor tool. So there's a benchmark score depending on your typology that will allow you to your building design to be approved. So a few principles, and we did this early. We actually followed a human-centered design approach to the development of the tool. And so we spent a long time at the start of the project focusing on the problem that City of Melbourne were trying to solve, so that we could make sure that the tool that we developed in response was fit for purpose. And so part of that was to set up some basic principles that would underpin the tool. I'm not going to read those out, but they were I guess the principles that were workshopped and agreed to as part of the driver for the tool. On the right, so that pic is an example of the testing we did. So the tool gives you a score-based outcome, and the score that's been set through the proposed planning amendment is that 0.55 mark. So what this testing was proposed to demonstrate is, what are people currently hitting? And it's clearly not good enough. What would they need to hit through the use of the tool? And we wanted to also demonstrate to industry and to state government that there is the opportunity to go well above the policy benchmark that was being set. And so that was the reason for including an optimized scenario in the testing of the tool. In terms of the way that the tool works, so obviously commissioned by the City of Melbourne, we led the consultant team, but we had two partners involved in the process. So I'll just call them out now. So University of Melbourne was Dr. Judy Bush, who does a great deal of research on green infrastructure as part of her academic role, assisted with the development of an academic evidence base, which underpins all the maths that sit in the back end of the tool. And Little Sketches are our developer partner. So they've designed the web interface and how that interacts with users, and links to the background evidence that drives the scoring outcome for each individual project. At its simplest, the tool is three parts. It captures some site particulars in order to understand what the opportunity set is for any one site. It then allows you, using landscape architecture drawings and schedule to document your project. And it does that by asking for user inputs against various green element areas on the building, so in ground or on a facade or on a roof, etc. And then it gives you your feedback loop. So that's your scorecard, which allows you then to go reflect on where you did well, where you didn't do well, how you then measure up against the proposed policy benchmark. And then obviously you've got the opportunity to revisit your design to introduce more green area or introduce the quality of the green areas that you're proposing in your design to get a better outcome. A key part of it is this area around ecosystem service outcomes. The whole tool is built on the relationship between a greening form or element and the impact against a suite of 7 ecosystem services, which I'll introduce in a moment. The primary user group is actually landscape architects. So as a part of a design team, and it requires what we're hoping through the use of the tool, especially now as it transitions to a regulatory environment, there's an opportunity there to bring landscape architects into the design process perhaps earlier than they're currently used. Sometimes the opportunity is lost because the architects run ahead too much and you don't get that integration potential. And so this is sort of, I guess, front loading a little bit of the process to ensure that integration occurs. I'm now going to just flip to the actual tool itself. So I encourage you to just take a note of the address, the URL there, and have a look at how it works in your own time. It's freely available. You won't be able to input an Adelaide suburb into it because it's not configured for Adelaide, but you can certainly play around and see how it works. But I'll give you a brief overview now before we move on. So I'll skip the about the tool section because that's kind of background and concepts and information. I'll jump into start a new site. First thing you do is you locate the site, the newly named Moreland Council, now Marybeck. We'll choose that, pops into there. Then we start the assessment. These are those green elements. This is the about your site section where you put in those particulars. You then jump into where on the green on the building you can locate. So let's choose, for example, planters on structure. So we click in there, and it asks us a bunch of questions which relate to the ability for humans to interact with the space and some other things that drive ecosystem service outcomes. So for example, whether people can use the space drives whether or not their green infrastructure can provide a recreational benefit. Visibility drives whether there's an aesthetic benefit or a sense of place benefit. The height above ground level dictates the biodiversity benefit and also the urban heat outcome. So I'll just click a few here so we can go through. And I'll just specify, so these are the elements that you can choose in terms of, we haven't included large trees for planters on structure because the soil volumes don't generally allow. So you document the vegetation type across those 4 areas, like whether it's, and the Indigenous is driven by essentially the Melbourne Bible on Flora of Melbourne by a woman called Marilyn Bull. And then you document the soil or supporting substrate. Just so we can go through. Choose another area. Okay. I do need to just jump in here and go a side area. So now we can have a quick look at the scorecard. As you can see, this is a pretty poor scoring outcome, and that's because we only included 20 square meters of ground cover for a site that's 1,000 square meters, 1,000 square meters. But you can start to see the feedback loop occurring in that we've got most of our benefit from the ground cover, but the soil or substrate provides some stormwater or surface runoff benefit. Over here on the right, we've got like a spider diagram, which demonstrates where you're excelling and where you need to improve. I answered no to that visibility question, and that's why I'm getting no ecosystem service benefit for that. So really encourage you to have a look in your own time, but that's just like a very, very quick version of how the tool works. So it's this number here that you're basically under the amendment C376 required to meet that 0.55 benchmark, which roughly equivalent like matches 40% equivalent green cover. So in terms of those ecosystem services in the evidence base, that list of 7 is the ecosystem services. Some of them provisioning services, some of them regulating services, some of them cultural services. And in a workshop process with the City of Melbourne, we apportioned the relative importance from a sort of a strategic or a policy context to those. So it was highlighted that food supply was important, but it wasn't as important as the role of green infrastructure in regulating urban temperature or providing habitat for biodiversity. These are, if for example, the strategic context changes or City of Melbourne does sort of specific work in areas and municipality where one of these is more important than these default values, we can tweak that to reflect that in the scoring. So you'll notice that there's no carbon sequestration on that list. There's no air quality, and that was because the impact at the building level was rated as relatively low compared to say what could be achieved across the city. So to make sure that the user inputs actually give you a feedback loop in the tool, some ecosystem services weren't included for those reasons. So the scoring is pretty complex. Like I've had my head in those spreadsheets for another municipality over the last couple of months, and it's but basically the first bit is how much green cover that you've got, and the second bit is how effective is it in maximizing those ecosystem service impacts. So for example, the high visibility and accessibility drives higher recreation and aesthetic benefit. Use of locally native species drives a biodiversity outcome. Green elements being closer to ground level will drive a biodiversity and urban heat outcome. And deeper soils gives you an improvement to surface runoff mitigation. There's a few extra, but they're kind of relatively minor. So, and the way it sort of, I guess, achieves the scoring outcome is at its simplest, a ratio between the opportunity area represented by the site area and the green factor area. But that green factor area isn't a brute force percentage of site cover. It takes into account all those elements that I've been communicating with you on. For example, a 20% lawn on top of a roof will give you far less benefit than the same square meterage of shrubs at ground level. And that's because of the significantly greater ecosystem service outcomes that sort of approach provides. There's a little bit of information there on how the score calculates through at a high level, but we probably don't have time to jump into that today, but it is there for your benefit. So in terms of where City of Melbourne is up to, they're currently operationalising the tool and implementing a governance framework that will give state government and users the confidence to take that step from a voluntary situation into a regulatory space. And they're investigating, so currently the tool doesn't have data storage online in its voluntary phase. There is a question as to whether we might go to a version that has online data storage. So you would get a user login, you would have access to all your projects, the data would be stored online. So that's a question that City of Melbourne sort of resolving at the moment. at the moment based on this move to the regulatory space. At the moment, what you do is you save your work by downloading a text file, which you can then upload and keep going at any time. So it just doesn't hold all those assessment files in the same place, but has the sort of, I guess, the manual functionality that it provides. And the other thing to note is that as we sort of close out the preso and go into question and answer mode, is that ourselves and our development partner, Little Sketches, have recently finished a similar tool for another major capital city. We'll leave it up to them to it'll be launched like in May, probably the end of May. So we'll leave once those comms are out, I can shoot them through to Ken to distribute amongst the team, but they've just asked us to be confidential on that. And the other thing to note is that the two organisations, Hip Hype and Little Sketches, have invested in a customisable tool and framework that will allow additional jurisdictions to come in as part of a national approach. What we're hopeful of is that 2 or 3 years into the future, this tool has a number of local governments using it, at least in voluntary capacity. And to do that, we think that a tool which has a consistent look and feel, and so a user will recognize it across jurisdiction boundaries that mean a lot to local government but don't necessarily mean a lot to a user. We'll be able to sort of create a common language and give local governments or state governments that feedback loop that they're looking for in terms of benchmarking green infrastructure at the site level. So watch this space as we sort of get a little bit closer to that over the next couple of months. We can be in touch with some further communication through Ken and the rest of the team.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I love it. And I cannot wait to be walking through a city that is that green at some stage. It's just fabulous. So Marina, what was our first question that we might read out for everybody?
Great to see this being implemented in Australia. When you were designing the tool, did you consider including blue infrastructure? If so, why did you decide to just stick to green?
Really good question. The reason for sticking to the green was right back to the purpose of the tool. The purpose was to value the impact of green infrastructure on the built environment. That was the clear purpose of the tool. It also, I guess, from a policy perspective, came out of a strategy and I guess local government direction around greening the city. The other thing that fed into that decision is that in Victoria there is a tool which is a bit hard to use and is finally being updated, which is called the Storm tool. It's a tool that's developed by Melbourne Water, and it based on site inputs, it values the stormwater quality benefit of different arrangements on site, including rain gardens and water tanks, etc. So it felt like, from a policy perspective, there was potential to overlap with that, and hence the singular focus on green infrastructure.
Great to see the differentiation between on-ground retained and on-ground new. She asked, I'd assume the retained scores more highly?
That's right, yes. So the way we work that through in the tool scoring is a new tree has a different value, like a new small tree or a new medium tree, for example, has a different square meter coverage than retained mature tree. So we use the coverage area to differentiate between the value of those, recognizing that a new tree will only be delivering its maximum ecosystem service benefit after 30 years. That differentiation doesn't exist in shrubs and ground covers because they meet those, I guess they meet that maturity in a much shorter time frame.
How can we start including South Australian areas in this tool?
Okay, so in terms of that last slide, we're probably only about maybe six weeks or perhaps 2 months away to having the ability to bring new jurisdictions into that national approach that we've been developing between the organisations. So it's very much on our minds, and probably what we thought might initially occur is that the Melbourne tool and the tool for the other capital city I mentioned were potentially going to be the licensing model to other jurisdictions. We've since kind of come to the conclusion that because City of Melbourne is focused primarily on that regulatory pathway, that the easiest way to bring new jurisdictions on at the lowest cost is through a sort of a national approach, which still has tailored outputs for the local level, but allows more flexibility in the way those services. So it's kind of a watch this space, but you're not going to have to watch it for very long before you can take that next step as a jurisdiction.
Or South Australia, people that have connections in South Australia, maybe get right into the next queue and get some funding available.
That's a fantastic tool, and it's so exciting to see its development. And I really hope that it's something that gets applied and brought into regulations in South Australia. But one of the interesting things I was thinking about is how could you apply it or adjust it for public realm or street sections so that you could, I guess, show the benefit of different or greening options in a public realm setting?
That definitely that's definitely possible, and we have been considering that opportunity with City of Melbourne and a couple of others. The feedback we've had initially on that question, which we've raised a couple of times, is that because local government has a greater deal of control over the streetscapes, that it's not as pressing in terms of their need as ensuring that as the private realm continues to develop, that we're not losing greening, we're actually gaining it. At least the data in Victoria sort of presents this quite a good story in terms of public realm canopy coverage improving over time, but at the same time, there's a commensurate loss on the private realm. So that's kind of been the primary driver of the tool, but there is potential in the other capital city that we've been working with. We have actually rated the impact of the development on the public realm. So if there's a loss of a street tree, or there's not, you do get pinged for that loss, and that means that you have to obviously make up more ground on the private side.
Hey Gavin, thanks for the talk today. Just a quick one about the temperature. Is that a surface temperature measurement, or is that like an air temperature, like comfort level measurement?
The way the tool works is it's because all of the ecosystem services, if you were to quantify them, have very different metrics. Obviously, you can quantify runoff mitigation through surface runoff. Urban temperature regulation can be the outcome of that can be done in a couple of ways that you've just mentioned. What we've done is we've reviewed the research and existing studies at the urban, the greening form level, and that's fed into an impact rating that has on that ecosystem service. So, for example, a large tree, because it has significant volume in the canopy, and the experienced ambient temperature underneath it can be experienced by humans, that gets the highest rating compared to a ground cover, for example, or a turf, which still has urban heat regulation benefit, but it doesn't provide that shade and amenity to humans. So that's how we've sort of, I guess, taken the quantified outcomes that are across the research and integrated them into a framework that makes sense for those ecosystem services to work with each other.
Right. Okay, cheers, thanks.
No worries.
Yes, so I can't quite remember the ratings that were shown on what was, but I seem to recall that the native and indigenous plants were rated more highly because of their biodiversity values. Yep. But in some situations, it could be that exotic plants provide much better cooling and shading values. For example, if you take a coastal environment here along the metropolitan coast, you're not going to get very many indigenous plants that are going to provide really good cooling and shading, but you're going to get some quite good results in that respect from some of the exotics. I just Norfolk Island pine comes to mind. It's a big, big shady tree. How have you decided on that rating system between exotics and natives and local indigenous when it comes to those kinds of benefits?
It's a really good question, Sharon. The way that they're treated in the tool is that for each greening form, so let's pick an indigenous tree, an indigenous large tree, that relationship between urban heat regulation and the relationship to habitat for biodiversity are separately rated in the tool. So for example, if you've got like a small coastal indigenous tree, you are getting greater value. You might be getting higher value for that for habitat for biodiversity, but because of its scale, you are getting a lower value for urban heat mitigation. So that the scale of the tree dictates is the major driver of the urban heat outcome.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
thank you.
So I was just commenting, I went through the Nightingale project in Adelaide, and they were saying that there was a very large barrier from the council that said that they couldn't have their vertical green wall around the core, which impacted, in their mind, the performance of the building quite a bit. It would be interesting to see the comparison between using the tool between what the intent was from Nightingale with that green space, as a bargaining chip, I guess, with the council, and then the result by taking it out. I believe that it was to do with fire risk as viewed by the council, but that was all my comment was. It wasn't really a question, but observation that a tool like this would have been a great bargaining chip for the designer at that point, getting approvals through.
It's a really good point. I will take it. We've got a few other questions, so we'll take it as a comment, but there is I'm personally hoping that we can figure out this, the fire issue with green infrastructure on facades, because I think the walls are up, but we're not seeing enough practical kind of integration of solutions that can meet both benefits. When there's a separation of the greening using either soil or a gap between the building facade, the fire risk is mitigated significantly. But I think, it's one of those things where the easiest pathway is just to say, no, you've got to take it off. So hopefully that moves over the next couple of years as we get more examples of it being done well.
Yeah, you just need some champions, I guess.
Hi there. Yeah, so my question was more about, and that's related to what you just said, is we find out that it's hard to actually gather the information in the right time when we do project to be able to make the right decision. And it's like a lot of time to go and find the resource that are spread around. So I was wondering if there are links in the software to actually find the resources necessary to make the good decision about the native plan, the more appropriate solution for a site or something like that. You know, when you have an objective of creating this amount of cooling, or if you work with a corridor of biodiversity for some specific animals and stuff like that, you know, having this kind of reverse effect of the software giving you some feedback on it, because I mean, for professional is good, but you end up in multi-professional environment where decisions need to be made really quickly. So having the opportunity to gather the resource in the meantime that you are giving a try on with these tools will be great, I think.
Yeah. So we made a decision in the development of the City of Melbourne tool that the place for guidance, like general guidance on good landscape practice or good biodiversity practice, etc. The best home for that wasn't in the tool, because those resources are spread. They are very difficult to keep 100% current, like to industry practice. And so the approach that the City of Melbourne has taken is where the tool is nested in terms of a landing page and introduced on their website is the home for other resources and guides that can, I guess, uplift the design, the design process for landscape architects and others. One of those is the Growing Green Guide, which I think is due for a refresh next financial year, but there are a couple of others as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
So I should note just on that the tool does give a whole bunch of inline help, but it's help to make sure the tool is used effectively rather than I guess how to do good landscape design on a building.
Hi there. I come from a somewhat different context, so putting different hats on, but at the moment working in remote Northern Territory community. But it just occurred to me that sometimes the remote context, whether it's a remote town in South Australia or a remote territory community, that has very different dynamics going on. And I just wonder if there are any tools that were being adapted to suit those smaller planning environments.
I think if we go back to the question that was earlier on, I think when you've got, like, in a remote community, you've got an abundance of space around the building. That's always going to be that's going to present the most cost-effective way to boost all the outcomes that the tool is proposing, is documenting and rewarding. It's not to say that this tool isn't fit for purpose to be used on a small scale residential lot, but it is, I guess, heavily focused on the building and the surrounds of the building rather than sort of a precinct approach. I'm not aware of a tool that currently looks at like the particular application of, say, remote Indigenous communities or at a township scale, but certainly like what would underpin that, in my view, would be sort of urban forest plans based on like the specific opportunities represented by that community, with potential application of the tool doing the lifting on the individual sites, if that makes sense.
Yep.
That's
Thank you.
fabulous. Thank you so much, Gavin. I mean, the topic is so interesting, and what you're doing is absolutely awesome. And obviously everyone thinks so by the amount of comments and discussion that occurs with this topic. I think it is time to wrap up now, though, Marina.
Yeah, as always, these sessions hopefully get you started and sparked with the conversation. Feel free to take them offline and continue the chats. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
And a big shout out. Thank you to Gavin for your time today.
Happy
No,
to-
no problem at all on my side. Very, very pleased to get all the questions that we did and for the interest in the topic. I'll chat with Ken after this just to make sure that you guys have got the opportunity to get back in touch if you'd like to chat more, etc. But yeah, other than that, have a really good day and look forward to checking in on next steps for South Australia.